Today on the Matt Walsh Show, we have closely followed the case of child killer Ronald Exantus, who was released from prison and set free after less than 10 years in jail. Well, now we have a number of surprising updates to this story. You don't want to miss it. Also, Donald Trump says that he doesn't think he's bound for heaven. Some of his Christian supporters took exception to this comment, but I found it actually encouraging. I'll explain. And a man who killed a child predator who was kidnapping his daughter has been charged with murder. Now he's also running for sheriff. Plus, the Republican leader of the Senate decided to celebrate a Native American Day yesterday instead of Columbus Day. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. Privacy isn't just some luxury. It's a big part of our individual freedom. But while the government hides behind classified documents, they're buying your data from brokers, tracking every move you make online. The NSA surveillance isn't a secret anymore. What is a secret? How to stop it. That's where ExpressVPN comes in. It's time to take back what is yours. ExpressVPN protects your privacy by routing all of your online activity through secure, encrypted servers, which means data brokers, tech companies, and government agencies can't see what you're doing online. What really sets them apart is their strict no-log policy. They literally don't collect or store your data. Last year alone, they received over 400,000 data requests from tech companies and governments, and they shared exactly zero customers' information because there was nothing to share. As someone who spends hours researching for each show, I rely on ExpressVPN constantly, whether I'm digging into sensitive topics or just browsing without my ISP, logging every search. I can't imagine doing research without that protection, especially when I have to connect to airport or public Wi-Fi on the go. Best part, it's incredibly easy to use. Just one click and you're protected. It works on everything from phones and tablets to smart TVs and desktops, and you can use it on up to 14 devices at once so your whole family can stay private and secure online. Right now, you get extra 4 months when you use my special link. Go to expressvpn.com/Walsh and get 4 extra months of ExpressVPN. That's expressvpn.com/Walsh. You'd be hard-pressed to find a map of any kind that's more infuriating than this one. This is the distance between a typical house on 43rd Terrace Road and Sunrise Elementary School in Marion County, Florida. And in case you're listening to the audio podcast, the house is directly on top of the school, basically. There's practically no distance separating the school from the house. They're very close together. There's a fence that covers some of the grounds. Anyone living in that house would easily be able to see the school children from any of his back windows. He'd also be able to access the school grounds in about 10 seconds. The problem with that is that this is the house that 42-year-old Ronald Exantus began living in immediately after he arrived in Florida at the beginning of this month. For privacy reasons, we aren't showing the exact address of the house, but this is the approximate distance and location according to multiple news reports. And this is remarkable because less than a decade ago, as we discussed at length last week, Ronald Exantus murdered a 6-year-old child in Kentucky named Logan Tipton. He also violently attacked the child's father and siblings before police arrived. And yet, as of October 3rd of this year, Ronald Exantus was not in prison for killing that child, nor was he buried 6 feet under the ground where he belonged. Instead, because the state of Kentucky released him on good behavior after just a few years in prison, child killer Ronald Exantus was living in a home that's adjacent to an elementary school. This is the kind of development that doesn't need any further explanation. On its face, it's the greatest possible betrayal by the state of Kentucky and its judicial system. And I say judicial system with the maximum possible degree of contempt. No actual system of justice, no real system of justice could possibly produce this result, where a child killer ends up free out on the street living next to an elementary school. Now, we've talked before about the specifics of Ronald Exantus' case, how the jury somehow found him not guilty by reason of insanity for killing the 6-year-old child, but at the same time guilty for assaulting the boy's siblings and father, which makes no sense. We've discussed how Kentucky somehow classifies these assaults as nonviolent, allowing Exantus to serve less than half of his sentence. We've also discussed how ludicrous it is on its face to determine that someone who's supposedly insane, so insane that they would kill a child, can still be unleashed on the public ever again. But really, no discussion on these points is needed. The mere fact that a child killer ended up a free man living next to an elementary school, practically on the elementary school's property, is all the evidence you need that law and order do not exist in the state of Kentucky or, frankly, in much of the rest of the country. But there is one very important part of the story that hasn't really been discussed. When Ronald Exantus moved into that home in Marion County, Florida, on October 3rd, he was not alone. He thought he was alone. He thought he could do whatever he wanted without anybody noticing. But that was not the case, because plainclothes officers were watching Exantus along with his property as soon as he arrived at the home. There were also other surveillance tools that were being used, which I'm not allowed to discuss, but this was 24-hour surveillance by armed officers, which was directed by the Florida Attorney General's office. And I know that because I was told this directly by a high-level source in that office. I was also told that the reason the Florida State Attorney General's office became aware of this case in the first place and of Exantus' presence in the state is that they saw my coverage of the case. Here's what I wrote on X at 1:16 p.m. on October 3rd. Quote, "This case should be getting a lot more attention. Should be massively viral. We need the White House on it. A man who broke into a house and stabbed a child to death is now walking free. One of the most heinous miscarriages of justice in American history." Close quote. Now, I didn't know when I wrote that post that Ronald Exantus had just acquired a Florida state driver's license and moved into his new home just hours earlier on the same day, right next to an elementary school. I had no idea where Ronald Exantus was. I had just seen a post from the Unlimited L's account on X, which posted a news clip about the case. And I reposted it with my commentary, trying to get as much attention as I possibly could to it. And soon afterwards, the White House press secretary said that the Trump administration was going to be getting involved in some way in this case, was going to look into it. In response, a lot of people were understandably cynical. You know, we're all familiar with how this kind of story usually plays out. There's a grave injustice. The government promises to address it, and then nothing happens. But in this case, something did happen. Florida officials saw what I wrote, and they ordered 24-hour surveillance immediately. That same day, they leapt into action. From a practical, tactical perspective, they had to make sure that Exantus wouldn't murder any more children, and they had to do that as soon as possible. But from a legal perspective, they also had to find a way, legally, to put Ronald Exantus back in prison for a very long time, as long as possible anyway. And that's precisely what happened next. And that's why within a few days, as soon as they could, those Florida officers arrested Exantus and charged him with a violation of the terms of his release. And we'll put the relevant portion of those terms up on the screen right now. You can see it. It reads, quote, "You shall not violate any law or city ordinance of this state or any other state or of the United States." Now, pretty simple. Obviously, this is kind of a boilerplate provision. It's likely that Ronald Exantus, if he even read the terms of his release, which he probably didn't, wouldn't care about this. He's never demonstrated any concern for the law at any time in his life, so why would he start now? But the Florida Attorney General's office was very interested in this provision because they're familiar with the following provision in Florida law. It reads, quote, "Any person who has been convicted of a crime in any federal court or in any court of a state other than Florida or of any foreign state or country, which crime if committed in Florida would be a felony, shall forthwith, within 48 hours after entering any county in this state, register with the sheriff of said county in the same manner as provided for in subsection 2. And subsection 2 describes the process of going to the sheriff, getting fingerprinted, getting photographed, doing all that. Now, violating this law, which is failing to register as a felon, is a low-level misdemeanor. But a low-level misdemeanor is a very big deal when you're out of prison on early release or parole or anything like it. In fact, a low-level misdemeanor can be the difference between going free and living near an elementary school full of potential victims and going to prison for another 10 years. And the state of Florida recognized that. They understood that under the law as it stands, this is the best way to protect the public from Ronald Exantus. Now, he should not be out of prison in the first place. He should have been executed. He should at least be in prison for the rest of his life. But under the law as it currently stands, this is what they could do. They could take him into custody, which they did. And that's where he remains right now without bail. He's going to be sent back to Kentucky soon, and we're told that it's very likely that Kentucky officials will ultimately revoke his early release as a result, not because they want to, of course, but because of the PR disaster that's resulted from this case. They really have no choice. So, and that means he's going to go back to prison for another 10 years. So to be clear, a single post on social media led to a response from the White House, 24-hour surveillance, and ultimately the removal of a child killer from the streets. And there's a very good chance that the state of Florida saved lives here. I mean, and I think it's almost certain that they did. And we're so used to government dysfunction that a rapid response like this seems kind of unthinkable. It can seem pointless to raise hell about anything on social media. But as we're often told, social media isn't real life. You know, Twitter isn't real life. X isn't real life. But this all seems pretty real to me. Now, if you're a bleeding heart type, you might object that Ronald Exantus is the victim of lawfare, because if we're being honest, Ronald Exantus probably wasn't even aware of this Florida law. Well, too bad, first of all. And second, that's not what lawfare is. Lawfare is when you apply existing laws in a clearly malicious, unequal, and novel way, far removed from their original intent, and you do it for often political reasons. For example, charging Donald Trump for storing classified material while letting Joe Biden hoard boxes of classified documents in his garage. That's lawfare. And every single Trump prosecution was like this. By contrast, the law in the state of Florida has a very clear purpose. It's to keep the people of Florida safe from out-of-state felons, and that law is working perfectly as intended right now. But there are deeper problems that need to be addressed here because, you know, the state of Florida cannot solve all of Kentucky's problems by itself. So take a look at this segment featuring Ronald Exantus' former public defender, who's a woman named Bridget Hoffler. Hoffler has left the public defender's office since defending Exantus and now serves as an assistant county attorney in Carroll County, Kentucky. So she's a prosecutor now. And specifically, she's a prosecutor focusing on neglect and abuse cases involving children. But she absolutely should not be. She should be fired immediately. And that's not because she represented Ronald Exantus. Everybody, no matter how evil they are, is legally entitled to a criminal defense in this country. That's the law. That should be the law, and it is. That's not why she should be fired. She should be fired because Bridget Hoffler just gave the following interview after Ronald Exantus' release. This is how she is talking about a man who murdered a child less than a decade ago. This is a report from a local news station. Quote, Exantus' former attorney, Bridget Hoffler, said Exantus called her after he was released. She said she was initially shocked that he was let out early because it was such a contentious case. Yeah, contentious is one way to put it. But, quote, it didn't really surprise me. If anybody deserved to get out early, it was Ron. He had accomplished so much while he was in prison. Now, to be clear, again, this is a prosecutor who says that a prosecutor now, who says that a child killer deserved an early release from prison because he accomplished so much while he was in prison. Now, this is the very definition of suicidal empathy, which is an overwhelmingly female problem, a liberal female problem. Once you stab a child in the head so many times that the blade bends, there is nothing you can do in prison, nothing whatsoever, that can possibly justify releasing you. I don't care what you do, okay? I don't care how many arts and crafts you manage to do. I don't care how many coloring books you complete or whatever Ronald Exantus supposedly accomplished while he was in a cage under armed guard. It doesn't matter. And the only person who would disagree with that idea is an enemy of civilization who should be nowhere near a prosecutor's office. In a separate interview, Bridget Hoffler somehow managed to make things even worse. Watch.
Jennifer?
Well, a decade-old Kentucky law allowed Exantus to be placed on mandatory re-entry supervision. In 2018, a jury convicted Exantus of assault for injuring Tipton's family members, but found him not guilty of the boy's murder by reason of insanity. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but served just 10 years before being released. We asked Exantus' former attorney to explain what mandatory re-entry supervision actually is.
So first of all, it's not discretionary in the least. It's mandatory. It's by operation of law. Nothing you can do to prevent it.
The case has garnered national attention, even from the White House, which said it's looking into his release.
I think, everyone is fearful. You have a lot of talking heads that know nothing about the facts of this case. They weren't in the courtroom during trial. And they don't know anything about Ron, and they don't know anything about this case. But, when this happened, Ron was a very well-established nurse.
Oh, he was a well-established nurse. I mean, can you imagine keeping a well-established nurse in prison? Again, she's saying this after this nurse murdered a child and tried to kill his entire family. And also, again, no one is taking this woman to task for the fact that she defended Exantus. She was a public defender. That was her job. She's not a public defender anymore, and she's not his attorney anymore. She's now actually a prosecutor who is still claiming, and she doesn't need to do this, she's doing it because she believes it, that it's great this guy's out of prison. He's a well-established nurse. Well, I would say that once you go and murder a child, that's the point where you are no longer a well-established nurse. You are a child killer. Your past employment is irrelevant. I don't care what you were in your past. You could have been Mother Teresa. It doesn't matter. Slaughtering children is the clearest possible red line. Of course, women like this don't see it that way. That's why they support abortion. Killing a child in the mind of the modern leftist, and in particular the modern leftist woman, isn't really a crime. I mean, that's how they think. It's certainly how this woman thinks. If Kentucky wants to have a functioning judicial system, then step one is firing this scumbag. She has no business being a prosecutor. She has no business holding any public office ever again. And at some level, she seems to recognize that because she's deleted all of her social media accounts and her phone number doesn't work anymore. The next step after this woman is terminated is to change the law in Kentucky so that nothing like this ever happens again. And one state representative in Kentucky, TJ Roberts, has proposed 2 bills that would have that effect. Watch.
The Tipton family has been victimized twice. The first time they were victimized was by Ronald Exantus, and he should have died in prison for what he did. But the second time that they were victimized was by the government of Kentucky. Our laws failed them.
State Representative TJ Roberts intends to file legislation next year to eliminate mandatory reentry supervision. The program releases nonviolent offenders 6 months before their release date to reacclimate to the world. Exantus's second-degree assault charges did not classify him as a violent offender, making him eligible for early release. Roberts proposes giving the power to grant this kind of reentry to the parole board, which stated it denied Exantus's parole every time it was considered, including the day before he was let out. Angela Cooper with the ACLU of Kentucky cautions a law change for a program that she says has, in most cases, worked as intended.
A single case, a single incident, a single unique set of circumstances should not be the basis for changing a law, creating a law.
And then we hear from the ACLU there, and, even by the non-existent standards of the ACLU, it's an extraordinary argument. Yeah, you can't change the law just because of one little child killer getting released after a few years and moving directly next to an elementary school. We're just supposed to allow that because, in general, it's supposedly a good thing to release violent criminals early while pretending that they're nonviolent. Actually, in a society where children are safe from psychopathic killers, which is the kind of society the ACLU does not want, it's common sense to change laws that produce catastrophically bad outcomes. That's how functioning societies work. And of course, it's a lot more than one violent criminal that's been released from prison because of laws like this. But even if it were just one, if this is a law that has enabled even one child killer to leave prison before they die, then there's a problem with the law. In a functioning society, you see a system that produces a bad result, you analyze how that result comes about, and then you change the system. It's cause and effect. It's a very basic principle. I mean, it's like saying that what the ACLU is saying, it's like saying that if your brakes fail in your car one time, there's no reason to take it into the shop and get it repaired. We don't need to go do a whole thing. We don't need to overhaul the system. It's just one time. It's just one time. Come on. It's exactly the same mentality. And to that end, TJ Roberts has also proposed another change to the law in Kentucky. Watch.
Roberts' second bill request focuses on insanity pleas.
If a criminal charge is all emerging from the same course of conduct, either you're sane for all the charges or you're insane for all of the charges.
He adds, typically, a person found not guilty by reason of insanity is committed to a mental health facility.
Once again, where are all the other lawmakers in Kentucky? I really appreciate TJ Roberts. Where are the rest of them? For that matter, where's Rand Paul, Thomas Massey? You know, Kentucky is their state. And I like both of those guys, but where are they on this? Have they said anything about it? Have they said a single word about it? Now, when my producer spoke to TJ Roberts last night, he said that he believes his legislation will pass. There's strong support among Kentucky lawmakers for each of them, and they don't need the Democrat governor, Andy Beshear, to sign off on them because only a constitutional majority is needed to overturn this veto. And Kentucky is, of course, dominated by Republicans. And that's very fortunate because, for his part, Andy Beshear has responded to the release of Ronald Exantus by defending the state parole board and attacking the White House for responding to my post on social media. That's what Andy Beshear is worried about, okay? Here's what Andy Beshear said, quote, for them, the White House to, speaking about the White House, for the White House to simply retweet that wrong information. The parole board has never made a decision to release Ronald Exantus. Instead, every time it came in front of them, they voted against him and to keep him in prison. Now, to be clear, the tweet from the White House's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, was as follows, quote, I can confirm the White House is looking into this. It's wholly unacceptable for a child killer to walk free after just several years in prison. And that was a direct response to my tweet, which we showed earlier, in which I said, again, quote, a man who broke into a house and stabbed a child to death is now walking free. Neither one of us spread wrong information. Everything we said was correct. Now, it's true that when this story broke, the Kentucky Parole Board claimed that they didn't want to release Ronald Exantus. The Department of Corrections said that their hands were tied. But even if that were true, the Parole Board and the Department of Corrections could have made their objections public. They could have drawn attention to what happened. They could have been shouting from the rooftops about this terrible atrocity, this terrible injustice that they were forced to take part in. But they didn't. They didn't do that at all. They didn't say a word about it. No, instead they waited for, the rest of us to do it for them. You know what? They waited for a podcaster in a different state to do it for them. And now they want to play victim. I had no choice. Well, maybe step up and have some courage. Maybe speak up. Maybe do something about it rather than, well, my hands are tied, nothing I can do. Just for that attitude alone, you are still villains in this. I don't care if the law mandated it or not. You are still villains in this story. They could have imposed stricter conditions on the release of Ronald Exantus so that the state of Florida would have an even easier time arresting him. They didn't do any of that. All they're interested in doing is covering for themselves. And the same is true of the governor of the state. I mean, even if it were true that disinformation had been spread about the Kentucky Parole Board, that's not really a priority. The priority, the travesty here is not that people are supposedly mistaken about government officials and what the law mandates. By the way, this is one of the consequences of having ridiculous laws that make no sense, is that for the rest of us, it's a confusing mishmash. And yeah, we don't know exactly who to blame. And then you people in the government, you hide behind that. You say, well, it's not my fault. How? You're spreading misinformation. Well, maybe step up and change the law before this happens. Okay, all we know is that this terrible atrocity was allowed to occur because of the way the system is set up. It's been set up by people. You people are in the system. You run the system. So yeah, it is your fault. Maybe for once in your lives, do something about it rather than standing back and just pointing the finger. Blame him, not me. It's pathetic. The injustice here is not that the parole board was according to them unfairly blamed. That's not the injustice. The injustice is that a child killer was let out of prison and that he moved next to an elementary school. That's what every single political official in Kentucky should care about and should be talking about. The lesson we should draw from this case is that we can indeed enforce laws. We can enforce them quickly. All of the built-in dysfunction of our legal system is a choice. One tweet, and next thing you know, Ronald Exantus is back in prison. That's because the laws that are necessary to ensure public order are already on the books. And in the states where they aren't, like Kentucky, they could easily be changed. The state of Florida, to its enormous credit, understands that. They're responsive to complaints, even when they come from out of state. They understand that the law is a tool to ensure public order, not to prosecute political opponents, not to, not for any means like that, but it's to restore order. And the result is that Ronald Exantus is in a prison cell right now, instead of hanging out near an elementary school. Many more criminals deserve the same fate. They can be locked up just as quickly as he was. And if we notice what's happening around us and apply pressure on public officials to correct it, as we did in this case after learning of the brutal murder of Logan Tipton and the early release of his killer, then that's exactly what will happen. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Did you know that for generations, families cooked with natural animal fats like beef tallow? Somewhere along the line, we switched to highly processed vegetable and canola oils. These industrial oils, originally developed as machine lubricants during World War II, became kitchen staples after major food corporations partnered with health organizations to market them as healthier alternatives. The reality is more complex than the marketing suggested. Today, many people are rediscovering traditional cooking fats like grass-fed beef tallow, which offers a return to wholesome ingredients for our families. Golden Age beef tallow transforms your cooking with a rich, satisfying flavor that many remember from classic restaurant dishes. This traditional fat offers practical advantages too. Its high smoke point makes it perfect for everything from searing steaks to roasting vegetables without breaking down like many processed oils do. Made from 100% grass-fed American cattle in the Midwest, it contains no additives or preservatives, just pure traditional cooking fat that delivers both exceptional taste and nutritional benefits, including fat-soluble vitamins and healthy fatty acids. After trying Golden Age beef tallow with my own steaks, I can tell you the flavor and searing quality are on another level compared to conventional oils. Ready to go back to the basics? Give Golden Age beef tallow a try. Go to goldenagefats.com/Walsh and use code Walsh for 25% off your first order. That's goldenagefats.com/Walsh, code Walsh for 25% off your first order. Drowning in credit card and loan debt? You're not alone, but here's something most people don't know. Fall is actually the best time to negotiate with your lenders. Why fall? Well, credit card companies and lenders are doing year-end accounting and desperately need to clear problem accounts from their books before audits begin. This creates a narrow window where they're far more willing to cut deals than any other time of year. Done with Debt has cracked the code on this timing advantage. They know exactly which companies are most motivated to negotiate right now and use this insider knowledge to get results you can't achieve on your own. Best part, no bankruptcy, no new loans, no credit damage at all. In fact, most clients end up with more money in their pocket within the first month because they're no longer drowning in minimum payments. But this window won't stay open forever. Once Q4 hits, lenders tighten up again and your leverage disappears. Get started now while you still have time. Go to donewithdebt.com and talk with one of their specialists for free. Visit donewithdebt.com, donewithdebt.com. All right. As you can see, if you're watching the video podcast, we launched today in our brand new studio. I've been in studio limbo for several months, and now we have this beautiful new space, which I'm very happy with. You can see my big, I think you can see it in the shot there, my big wooden carved largemouth bass on the mantle, which I'm really proud of. That's the whole studio was really constructed with that in mind. I told them I have this big carved fish that I haven't anything, I don't know what to do with. So like build the entire studio around this fish. And that's what we did. So, and I think it's great. Speaking of things that I think are great, I wanted to start with this. So President Trump has obviously had a big week. I think that puts it quite mildly. Ended the war in the Middle East, earned himself a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, he wasn't awarded a Nobel Peace Prize, but he did earn one, whether he was awarded it or not. So a big week. And amid all that, there was a moment that went viral of Trump. I think he's on his plane on Air Force One, talking to reporters. And Trump has been criticized a fair amount by conservatives, by his Christian supporters, some of them, for what he said here. But and that's why I find it interesting. But I think that he's being unfairly criticized. Let's play the clip. Here it is.
You know, I'm being a little cute. I don't think there's anything going to get me in heaven. Okay, I really don't. I think I'm not maybe heaven bound. I may be in heaven right now as we fly in Air Force One. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make heaven, but I've made life a lot better for a lot of people. And you know, as an example, had the election of 2020 not been rigged, you would have millions of people living just in Russia, Ukraine alone. That would have never happened, and it didn't happen for 4 years. And I knew Putin very well. It was the apple of his eye. All the things I've said would have never happened. We had an incompetent administration. We had an incompetent president. And because of a crooked election, millions of people are dead. And by the way, the Israeli thing was much harder to get settled because of the past administration. Okay?
Okay, so plenty of criticism of Trump from some Christians because of his comments there that he's not heaven bound, you know. And they say this is proof that Trump isn't spiritually mature at best, doesn't understand the gospel. Dana Lash, Eric Erickson were two of the conservative commentators who criticized Trump. Dana posted, he needs better spiritual advisors around him. If he believes this, God's grace covers all by belief, not deed. Now, I like Dana and Eric and a lot of the other conservative commentators who issued criticisms, but I disagree with them on this one. And first of all, it's clear that Trump is at least partially joking. You know, this is a self-deprecating joke. And that's one thing that's very underrated about Trump, I think, is his capacity for self-deprecation, for being self-effacing. He's thought of as this very bombastic, self-assured guy, which he is, of course, but he also frequently has these, I find, charming moments of humility and self-deprecation, and this is one of them. But also, I would say Trump's attitude here is, I think, in particular for a leader, for a person in a position of leadership, but really for anyone, is more spiritually mature and more theologically sound than the idea held by a lot of people criticizing him on this point, that, you know, as long as we've professed our belief in Christ at some point, then we can say for absolute 100% certainty that we're going to heaven. Once saved, always saved, right, is the idea. So if you declare that Trump, if Trump declares, if anyone declares that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, and then 10 years later, you know, you go off and become an axe murderer or something, you are still absolutely guaranteed to go to heaven. That's the idea. And the people who promote this doctrine, they try to get around this. Obviously, they've heard this objection many times, and they'll try to get around it by saying, well, if you become an axe murderer, it means that the profession of faith was never sincere. But that's kind of ad hoc reasoning, and it's totally fallacious. And the fact is that a person can sincerely believe that Jesus is Lord and also go off and commit horrific sins. I mean, it's possible for both of those things to happen. I mean, Satan knows that Jesus is Lord, and yet he is still Satan. So you can't really get around this problem. If you believe once saved, always saved, then you believe that a person can commit the most horrific, monstrous sins imaginable, not repent for them. They could go be a murderer or a child predator, the worst things imaginable, and still be absolutely sure of their own salvation the whole time, as long as they believe in Jesus Christ. And that's the implications of the doctrine, a doctrine which is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it was never the traditional way of understanding salvation. Trump's view is much more traditional, much more in line with the traditional view, much more in line with what the church fathers taught, what the early church taught, not to mention what Jesus himself taught. Jesus said to the adulterous woman, go and sin no more. I don't condemn you, go and sin no more. Meaning you can't just go out and do what you want. You can't go back to the sinful lifestyle. So, to get into the whole theological debate, I'm only saying that I think the people criticizing Trump are on shakier biblical footing than he is here. And I think Trump's comments are, straight out of Philippians. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That's what I take from it. This is Trump's fear and trembling. And we should all have fear and trembling. The people who say, oh yeah, I'm saved, I'm definitely going to heaven no matter what. Well, where is the fear and trembling in that? Where is the working out? I mean, it's right there in the Bible. And regardless of any of that, I will say this, no matter where you stand theologically, I would much rather have a leader who has fear and trembling, who has this humility, and has this, is unsure of his own ultimate fate. I would much rather have that in the most powerful man in the world than one who believes that no matter what he does, no matter what decisions he makes, he definitely can't go to hell no matter what. I would much rather the former scenario for a whole host of reasons. All right, we've talked about the situation in Cincinnati, and the city's in bad shape, plagued by crime, plagued by dysfunction. Over the weekend, there was another shooting, multiple shootings. There was one at a restaurant downtown. 2 people were shot, maybe at the restaurant, or this might have been 2 different shootings. But regardless, you lose track of all the shootings. But chaos in Cincinnati, we've talked about this. I want to play this clip of the police chief, Chief Teresa Thietig. I still haven't figured out how to pronounce her last name. Theetge. Thieg, probably. I guess the T is silent. Is that what it is? Teresa Thieg, I'm going to guess. Anyway, we've heard from her before on the show, and you know how I feel about female police chiefs. Well, not to prove a point that's already been proven 1,000 times already, but here is Chief Teresa's message to the violent criminals who are, shooting each other in the street. Here's her message to them. Watch.
And so my message to everybody, learn how to behave in our city, but especially learn how to behave in our downtown and our Fountain Square. And our officers will approach you if you start to behave disorderly on Fountain Square. Because these things sometimes start as a minor altercation and then evolve into something bigger. So do not come downtown, especially on Fountain Square, if you don't know how to behave.
Now, you better behave. I've had enough of these shenanigans out of you, mister. There won't be any more misbehavior. I'll tell you right now, don't make me put you in timeout. I'll call your parents. You're going to miss recess, young man. There'll be no more misbehavior. That was one too many shootings, okay? I gave you too many chances. You're going to stop the shootings right away. When I get to 3, 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. This is the police chief of a major American city. She sounds like a disappointed assistant principal in a middle school somewhere. She sounds like an overwhelmed substitute teacher in a 6th grade math class. And this is how she responds to, criminality and violent crime. There's just no hope of restoring any semblance of law and order when you have somebody like this in charge. It is a total farce. And I know people get mad when I say it, but we just should not have female police chiefs, okay? We just shouldn't. That's a man's job. And I know there are plenty of bad police chiefs out there who are men. Don't get me wrong. I realize that being a man is not in and of itself enough, okay? It's not sufficient. It's not like if you say you want to be police chief, I would look at you and say, oh, you're a man. Well, good. You're fine. You're great. No, that's just the first box of many that you should have to check in order to be qualified for the job. Law enforcement is an inherently masculine thing. It's a masculine profession, and you need leaders of men. Okay, you just do that. It's the same reason why there could never be a female NFL head coach. I mean, there can be legally. I'm sure the NFL would love it. I'm sure the NFL's pushing it behind the scenes. They would love to have that. But it's not ever going to happen. Because, yeah, you could find a woman who knows football really well. You could find a woman who knows football more than I do. It wouldn't be that hard. That's possible. But women cannot be leaders of men. Okay, that's what it comes down to. And this should not be, I understand it is controversial because we live in a very stupid culture, but it should not be it should not be controversial. Women are not leaders of men. Men are leaders of men. That's why the idea of a woman trying to lead a football team is just absurd. It's like a cartoon. The men on the football team need to be led by a man who they respect, who can inspire them to run out onto the field, throw their body around, put themselves in harm's way. And if that's true of football, a game, which we all know that it is, then how much more is it the case with something like law enforcement or the military? You're actually putting your life on the line. You need men in charge. And we shouldn't be shy about saying that. We shouldn't be beating around the bush. There are certain roles in society that should be filled by men. I mean, it's as simple as that. There are some things in life where you can look at it and you say, that's not really for women. Women shouldn't be doing that. This is one of the many things that up till very recently, nothing controversial about saying this. The only thing that would be remarkable about saying any of this up till recently is just that you feel the need to say it. People would look at you strange because they would say, yeah, obviously. Of course. Like men and women are different. They are suited for different things, obviously. But that's how it is now. And, and we all know it. We all know it. We all understand. Everyone listening to me right now knows it at some level. When you just look at this police chief Teresa, before she opens her mouth, you look at her and you say, oh, come on. I don't care who you are. I don't care how enlightened you pretend to be. You see, before she says a word, you see that and you go, okay. Really? And there are situations where it goes the other way around. I mean, there are jobs where you would say that's not for a man. Like, it's just men are just not suited for that. I've used the example plenty of times. I think it's a good example is like a babysitter, a nanny. Doesn't matter. I'm not hiring a man to do that job. No way in hell. I don't care how qualified you are. I don't care. No way. Why? Well, because it's not a man's job. Men are just not meant to do that job. They're not suited for it. Now, not every woman is qualified. If I'm looking for a nanny and a woman walks in the door, I'm not going to say, well, she's a woman, so clearly she can do it. There are other qualifications, but the first box on the list that needs to be checked is that they have to be a woman. And, men are disqualified right out of the gate. Simply because of their sex. I would discriminate against them purely for factors that are totally outside of their control. I would absolutely do that without hesitation, without apology. If a man showed up for a nanny interview, I would say, no, get out. What are you doing here? Get the hell out of here. Oh, is it because I'm a man? Yeah, that's why. And again, we can all see that almost every person feels the same way. Instinctively, you just know it. Right? Anyone out there looking for a babysitter, nanny, something for childcare, you're not going to hire a man. And we all know that. And with that, I think it's more acceptable to admit. People are more likely to admit that. Right? I think you can get people to admit that there are roles in society that, yeah, really, that should be a woman doing that. You can usually get people to admit that. But if you go the other way and say, well, yeah, okay, women are, and then there are roles where really it should be a man. When you say that part of it, that's where people get very upset, even though, again, instinctively, we all know it's true. And it's okay to trust your instincts. You know that? Your instincts, what I mean by instincts, we're talking about just our innate understanding. We just have an innate understanding of certain things. Like in your gut, you just know it. And it's okay to trust that. In fact, you should. You should just trust that. And so the whole conversation is really pointless. Because I'm trying to persuade you of something that you already know is true deep down. All right. This is kind of related. There's a guy down in Arkansas named Aaron Spencer who's running for sheriff. And that's notable because this guy is currently charged and will soon be on trial for murder, specifically for killing a pedophile who was molesting his daughter. And here he is announcing his candidacy. Listen.
Hello, Lone Oak. My name is Aaron Spencer. Many of you know my story. I'm the father who acted to protect his daughter when the system failed. I'm also a husband, a combat veteran of the 82nd Airborne Division, a contractor, and a farmer. And through my own fight for justice, I have seen firsthand the failures in law enforcement and in our circuit court. And I refuse to stand by while others face these same failures. That's why I'm announcing my candidacy to run for Lone Oak County Sheriff. This campaign isn't about me. It's about every parent, every neighbor, every family who deserves to feel safe in their homes and safe in their community. It's about restoring trust, where neighbors know law enforcement is on their side, and families know that they will not be left alone in a moment of need. Together, we can build a safer, stronger Lone Oak County for every family. I'm Aaron Spencer, and I'm running for sheriff of Lone Oak County.
Well, now we see the diametric opposite. Here's a leader of men. Here's a guy who you want to have in charge of law enforcement in your community. And reading a bit more from New York Post, it says a father accused of killing his 14-year-old daughter's rapist is running to be sheriff, claiming the legal system failed him by charging him with murder. Aaron Spencer allegedly gunned down Michael Fossler, 67, after catching him driving off with his daughter, whom Fossler had already been charged with grooming and abusing, according to court documents. Announced his candidacy. We just heard that. Spencer was charged with second-degree murder last October after allegedly killing Fossler when he found him in a truck with his daughter. The dad told authorities he had driven around his neighborhood after discovering his daughter was missing, then found her being driven away by Fossler, who had already been charged with multiple sexual offenses against Spencer's daughter. He forced the accused rapist off the road and shot him. And now he's going to be on trial for murder. So it's insane. Not insane that he's running for sheriff. I think that's great. I would definitely vote for him if I could. But the fact that they're actually pursuing murder charges against this guy, like he's going to trial. And keep in mind, this was in Arkansas. And I know we like to think that red states are these bastions of sanity. But this guy, we just talked about Kentucky and what's happening there. This guy chased down a 67-year-old pedophile who had already been convicted of abusing this same child, found him abusing his daughter, shot him, and now they're trying to put him in prison. They're trying to take him away from his daughter, who he was protecting, and put him in prison. And according to the mythology of the red state, right, the conservative Bible Belt red state, according to that mythology, the mythology is that the cops would have shown up, they would have seen what happened, they would have, you get the basic facts of the case. It would have been really easy to establish, he was driving away with this girl, he's a pedophile, everything. And rather than charge him with murder, they would have taken him out for a beer and congratulated him and then sent him on his way. Like, that's the mythology of a place like Arkansas, is that's how it would happen. But instead, this is what they do. If you act to defend yourself or your loved ones, the system will do everything in its power to destroy you and punish you. And here's what makes this so much worse. It's not like this is a system where they enforce the letter of the law to a T, right? They throw the book at anybody. Law and order enforced by the book, no mercy. And so even if you shoot your daughter's abuser, they're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And if your actions don't comport with the letter of the law 100% the whole way through, they're going to throw you in prison. That's not the system, okay? That's not the way that it works. And even if it did work that way, I would obviously still strenuously object to charging Spencer with a crime. But that's not how it works. Okay, Spencer is not being charged and tried in the context of this by-the-book, pitiless justice system that just holds everybody accountable for the slightest infraction, right? That's not what this is. This is a system that only acts this way towards guys like Aaron Spencer. But when it comes to your everyday lowlife, your thieves, your thugs, your hoodlums, your dysfunctional losers, your career criminals, your psychotic vagrants, your drugged out, dangerous zombies, and so on, for their sake, the system does everything it can to be kind and be merciful and give them a second chance. Well, where's Aaron Spencer's second chance? I mean, even if you think he did the wrong thing, which I don't know how you could possibly think that, there is nothing more right than killing the man who's abusing your daughter, trying to drive away with her, kidnapper. I mean, he's in the process of trying to kidnap your daughter. A pedophile is kidnapping your daughter. I cannot think of any more appropriate response than to shoot him and kill him and take your daughter back. But even if somehow you think that he did the wrong thing, even if you're that deluded, okay, well then why shouldn't he get a second chance? Why aren't we sympathizing with his lived experience? Why aren't we thinking about his mental state? His trauma, his very real trauma. Like all the nonsense that's constantly used to let off the worst humans on the planet, let them off the hook. We never use it for the sake of actual law-abiding citizens who are driven to take extreme action when they're put in extreme situations. Daniel Penny, of course, is another example. There are many others. And that's the thing. We like to say that this is a soft on crime system. And I use that phrase too, kind of a shorthand. It's a convenient shorthand, but it's not really true. That would not be nearly as bad as the system that we currently have. Because a soft on crime system, in that kind of system, Aaron Spencer, even if he did commit a crime, which he didn't, he would benefit also. Right? If it was really a soft on crime system, then we would also say to him, well, that's the attitude you would take. So he would benefit from that. But we're not. Actually, this system is merciless and severe when it wants to be. The system is downright medieval in its approach to crime and punishment when it wants to be. But it only wants to be when the accused criminal is somebody like Aaron Spencer. A law-abiding man, usually a white man, who has to do something extreme in defense of his loved ones. And why is that the case? Why do they come down on Aaron Spencer? Why do they come down on Daniel Penny? Because those men, what they did is a rebuke of the system itself. It is the system defending itself. Aaron Spencer and Daniel Penny, and there are many other examples, but just using those two, they tried to destroy Daniel Penny's life. They tried to put him in prison. It didn't work out. They're going to try to do the same thing with Aaron Spencer. But in both of those cases, those were men who had to step up and defend the innocent because the system failed to do it. Jordan Neely, the psychotic vagrant, should have never been on that subway in the first place. He should have been behind bars long ago. This guy, this pedophile, should have been behind bars already. The system failed to act. These men had to step up in the system's place. And so that is the crime. That's the crime that they committed, is by exposing the ineptitude of the system itself. And for that reason, that's why they're trying to punish them. And it is a horrendous injustice. Let's get to the daily cancellation. You know what's annoying? Having to choose between being a responsible gun owner and actually being able to access your firearm when it matters. I've got kids, so obviously my handgun needs to be securely stored, but I also refuse to be that guy fumbling with keys or praying my batteries didn't die during a 2 a.m. break-in. That's why I use StopBox Pro. I've had mine for a few years now, and look, I'm not easily impressed by gun storage. I've seen it all, but this thing, it is brilliant. It's got a push-button mechanical lock system that works every single time because there are no batteries that will die on you, no keys to lose when you're camping or God knows where else. It's 100% mechanical, which means it's 100% reliable. You just push the code and boom, you're in. Fast enough to matter, secure enough to keep the kids safe. And here's something that's actually shocking in 2025. StopBox makes everything right here in America. Their own facility, no tariff drama, no sketchy overseas manufacturing, just American workers building quality gear. Plus, the StopBox Pro is TSA compliant, so you can actually travel with it without the usual airport nightmare. They've also got vehicle safes, chamber locks, basically everything you need to stay prepared without turning your house into Fort Knox. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off at StopBox when you use code Walsh10 at checkout. Head to StopBoxUSA.com, use code Walsh10 for 15% off your entire order. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Yesterday, of course, we honored Christopher Columbus and all the European pioneers who came in his footsteps to claim this land for Christ. We celebrated the conquest of civilization over Stone Age savagery, and we recommitted ourselves to defending civilization against the forces of chaos and barbarism that threaten it today. And when I say we, of course, I'm not talking about low testosterone degenerates like Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson or Minnesota Governor Tim Walz or the Buffalo Bills, all of whom decided to celebrate something called Indigenous Peoples Day on Sunday instead of Columbus Day, or rather on Monday. Here was the official statement from the Democratic Party, quote, "On Indigenous Peoples Day, we honor our country's first people and celebrate their culture, traditions, and contributions. We remain committed to honoring tribal sovereignty and working in true partnership to strengthen Native communities every day." This is a statement that's so poorly conceived and so utterly nonsensical that no matter who you are, regardless of your politics, you simply cannot defend it. The country's first people were white Europeans. Okay, the country's. We're talking about the country, which is the United States of America. The first people of this country were white Europeans. It's a historical fact. They're the ones who founded the United States. They're the ones who populated it nearly exclusively in its initial years. Indian tribes are not indigenous to the United States of America, to the country of the United States of America. They're not indigenous to it in any way, shape, or form. Now, you can make the case that some Indian tribes controlled their own territories before white Europeans arrived. They were extraordinarily primitive and had no meaningful technology or civilization to speak of, but they did occupy the land. That's true, but that still doesn't make those tribes indigenous to the United States. Doesn't even make them indigenous to the Americas because in every single case, that tribe brutally conquered some other tribe that used to live here. Indian tribes were on this continent before white Europeans, but even they came from someplace else. Nobody originates here by the strictest definition of the term. But certainly, what cannot be disputed is that the primitive tribes were not the ones who formulated the country known as the United States. That country was formed by, again, white Europeans. And so white Europeans are the country's natives. Saying that Indians are natives to the country because they were on the land first, it's like saying that the founder of Apple is whatever tribal chieftain ruled the land where Apple's offices were first built. I mean, it makes no sense. So really, no matter how you slice it, the official statement of the Democrat Party, their grand rejection of the idea of Columbus Day, is gibberish. And indeed, that was true of every Democrat statement yesterday. Here's what Ayanna Pressley wrote. She apparently is still a congresswoman. And she wrote, quote, "Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. We're all on stolen land. And while Republicans try to whitewash American history, we acknowledge our country's role in inflicting trauma on our Indigenous neighbors. We'll keep celebrating their contributions, centering Native voices in our policymaking, and building a more just, equitable future." Now, left unsaid, coincidentally enough, is what contributions these allegedly Indigenous people made. to the U.S. exactly? I mean, do they contribute electricity, medicine, civil engineering, architecture? What do they contribute? It's a valid question. Ayanna Pressley doesn't say. Neither does Cori Bush, who is definitely not a member of Congress anymore, but she seems to enjoy pretending that she is one. So yesterday she took a break from magically healing the cancer of random hobos to post the following statement, which definitely is not the result of asking an AI chatbot to list 10 random Indian tribes. Quote, on Indigenous Peoples Day, we recognize that St. Louis sits on the ancestral lands of Chickasaw Nation, Kickapoo Tribe, Osage Nation, Otoe Missouri Tribe, Quapaw Nation, and some others. The U.S. must reckon with its colonial history and honor Indigenous leadership. Now, it's tempting to make all the usual responses to tripe like this. We could ask why Cori Bush doesn't leave these ancestral lands if she's so bothered by the fact that she's sitting on them. We could ask her to define the word reckon or to spell it without spell check or AI. But really, it's not worth the effort because this is what you expect from Cori Bush and Ayanna Pressley and the Democrat Party. And, you know, by now we're all used to the fact that these people, along with the Buffalo Bills, despise this country and want to destroy Western civilization, which is why they want to tear down the great men who created it. None of that is remotely surprising. But there was at least one statement from yesterday that, to many conservatives who still trust the establishment for some reason, was somewhat surprising. This was the statement from John Thune, who's the Senate Majority Leader. So we're talking about a Republican, not just any Republican, but the highest-ranking Republican in the Senate. He replaced Mitch McConnell last year. And here's what John Thune wrote. Quote, today we celebrate Native American Day. I'm proud to join South Dakotans in honoring the heritage and contributions of the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. Now, this is a statement that's completely indistinguishable from the bitter, unhinged, anti-American ramblings of complete morons like Cori Bush or Ayanna Pressley. There's no daylight here whatsoever. And to be clear, there is no federal holiday called Indigenous Peoples Day or Native American Day. We have Columbus Day. And even if there were a federal holiday called Indigenous People Day, it would be absurd for any lawmaker, much less one calling himself a conservative, and much less the conservative leader in the Senate, to celebrate it. The so-called native people were living about 5,000 years behind the Western world. They did not and could not contribute very much because they hadn't even invented the wheel or written language. I mean, the Europeans contributed much more to them than the other way around. I mean, it's like if an advanced species of alien were to land on our planet from another galaxy. The very fact that they made it to us instead of us making it to them already means that they are light years beyond us in nearly every possible respect. Now, we'll be able to contribute to their anthropological understanding of the earth. We'll be able to enlighten them about our own specific way of life, which they didn't know about. But we're not going to be able to astonish them with our innovations. We will be the astonished ones. Okay? We will learn much more from them than they learn from us. Now, maybe we'll learn a lot from them and then we'll be conquered by this advanced, species of alien that have come. But there's no question about what direction most of the learning is happening. Okay. And that's why today is Columbus Day. And Native American Day or Indigenous People Day is nonsense. These people were primitive in no uncertain terms, which is why it's absurd to glorify them. We can be interested in them. We can respect them. We should. And we should be. It's interesting. It's very interesting to learn about Native American history. I'm fascinated by it personally. But to elevate, to glorify primitive Stone Age cultures that often engaged in cannibalism and human sacrifice and all manner of savagery, is just absurd. And 5 years ago, during the BLM hysteria, a majority of congressional Republicans signed on to the Juneteenth nonsense. That was the moment when it became clear to many conservatives that the Republican Party, is in trouble. If it wasn't clear to them before, it was clear then. Republicans were surrendering in a very public fashion to moral panics that were engineered by the left. But we are past that point, or at least we should be. Republicans are winning in the culture for the first time in memory. The absolute worst thing we can do when we're ahead is to validate the most destructive and incoherent myths that have been invented out of whole cloth by the communist anti-American left. And make no mistake, this is a recent invention of the left. Go back and look up Bill Clinton's proclamation for Columbus Day in 2000. Okay, it's interesting to go back and look at this now. Here's what he said, quote, "While Christopher Columbus's epic voyage took place almost 3 centuries before the founding of our democracy, his journey helped shape our national experience and offers important lessons as we chart our own course for the 21st century. One of the most valuable of those lessons is the importance of sustaining our spirit of adventure, our willingness to explore new concepts and new horizons. Columbus, after careful study and planning, rejected the conventional thinking of his time, sailed for the open seas, and succeeded in opening up a new world for the people of Europe." I mean, it's like, speaking of coming from a different planet, it's like that might have been written, that might as well have been written on a different planet. That is not, that's what Democrats used to believe. It's how, it wasn't all that long ago. That was a whole statement about Columbus without even one sentence talking about our guilt or lamenting the evils of colonialism or any of that. It was just a statement saying Columbus was a great man. We should be grateful for him. That's what Democrats used to believe. They used to understand or pretend to understand that Columbus is a great man of history because he did great things. By contrast, here's what Joe Biden said on Columbus Day last year. Quote, this is about 25 years later. This is how the Democrats were talking about it then. "For many Italian Americans, the story of Christopher Columbus's voyage crossing the Atlantic on behalf of Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II remains a source of pride." And then Biden proceeded to ramble on about so-called indigenous folks, saying that they made vast contributions to the world, again, without listing any of them. Now, the transformation of the Democrat Party is unmistakable. Over the past 2 decades, they've made a conscious decision to rewrite history, condemn our forefathers, and glorify barbarism. They're not hiding their goal, which is to make the United States just as primitive as the random tribes that they hastily look up on Wikipedia. That's the decision that Democrats have made, which is one of the reasons why they're an extremely unpopular party at the moment. If Republican leaders, for some reason, make the same choice, then they too will destroy their party and any credibility it has. And ultimately, they'll destroy this country. That's an outcome that no conservative and no reasonable person can tolerate. And that is why John Thune, who celebrated a fake Indigenous Peoples Day while ignoring Christopher Columbus, is today canceled. That will do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
Time magazine shaves President Trump's hair. America harvests organs from suicidal Canadians. And the U.S. is sending illegals on a one-way trip to Eswatini. Check it out on The Michael Knowles Show.